This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Moore. Throughout, I guess, crime history, there are geographical locations that are associated with horrific events. All you have to do is look at, Jonestown, for instance, or some such place as that. And, I think that part of that goes to the idea that, we as humans, we have to have some kind of marker to keep up, to understand. And automatically, when you hear certain names, they create a chill up and down your spine. Today, I want to talk about a case that originates back in 2023. And the name that is associated with this event, which is so horrific, is actually called The Compound. It's located in Florida. And what took place at that location, I believe, will chill you to your core. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Brother Dave, good to join you. I feel like, sometimes I feel like I just absolutely assault you based upon these cases that I send your way. Because, there's no, I don't know, rainbows and lollipops, where we kind of indwell many times. And they're horrible things. But I feel like this is a case that we need to talk to. We're talking about a single mother of two. And what seems to be an origin of the story in the dating app world. It's a brave new world that we live in, isn't it?
Nancy Howery, divorced mother of two, good relationship with the ex-husband. They share custody of their two children, and Nancy fails to pick the kids up from school as she normally would. And when that happens, her ex-husband knows this is not normal. Something's wrong. And so immediately he's on the phone reporting her missing. And boom, they find out, okay, you've mentioned this so many times, and I'm glad you have, Joe, because you've mentioned forensics and data, forensics in our phone, our computer. The digital forensics that we experience now are relatively new, and every day it's getting closer and closer to knowing where you are every minute of the day.
Yeah.
Being able to hear your every word, being able to see what you're seeing, the camera on your computer, the camera on your phone, it's watching you.
Yes.
And it's marking where you are.
Yep.
And that's what they did to track this case.
Yeah. And as I have oft said, and I will continue to say, these, boat anchors that we carry around in our pockets everywhere we go now. And I teach this at Jack State. My students are entering into a world where literally these are portable crime scenes that exist and indwell with us 24/7. You cannot escape. You can't escape, their tracking. And, and look, to the credit of everybody involved in this case, they really, really tracked this guy down, I guess, Dave, in a pretty expeditious manner, if you will.
Less than a
there's
week.
Some of these things that kind of hang in the ether out there, but they tracked this guy down pretty quickly, didn't they?
I went back and pulled the news reports from the day, okay? And you're talking about February 18th. She doesn't pick up the kids. Within a week, they are on track with Mr. Stearns because Daniel Stearns was dating Nancy Howery. Now, Daniel Stearns is only 32 at the time, and Nancy is 44. That's a big difference in age when you look at it from the standpoint of you have a 32-year-old guy, and now you have a woman who she's already gotten one marriage behind her with two kids. She's got an established career. She's taking care of things. And he's 32 and is dating. That's just, to me, that's a big difference at that time in life. If 62 and 50, maybe not so much. 72 and 60, not at all. But 44 and 32, that's a big difference to me.
Yeah. And there's one other person involved in this. You'd mentioned previous marriage. It would seem at least that she's got a pretty good relationship with the ex, doesn't she?
Yeah. Yeah, because he's the one that called and said, she didn't pick up the kids. This is not normal. She's, and we looked at her house, called the phone, can't find her. She's missing. And he was the one that lit the fire. And thankfully, everybody responded because, as you've said, the forensics that you can find, think about it. If you're using a dating app to date somebody, you're tracked right there, already done. You're being tracked if you do something and they need to find out. And they did. They were able to find Daniel Stearns, had been in contact with her. They had met, they had dated, and they'd also found out a number of other things from Mr. Stearns from, text messages and things like that. That Daniel Stearns had rules for dating that he expected Nancy to follow. And Nancy Howery, who had already gone through a divorce, custody battles, and all that, you're not going to push a woman like that around. You ought to respect that. Respect a woman who has done this, but he didn't. And Daniel Stearns didn't like the fact that she was dating other men. She wasn't just seeing him. She didn't want to just see him. She wanted to see what was out there.
Well, she's a single mom. And so, look, I got to tell you, from my perspective, all right, every time you go on a date with somebody and it's like an extended interview, particularly if you've got two kids, and look, I mean, people get lonely. They need relations. They long for a relationship. But for a single mom that has two kids, you have to think you're dating him, yes, but I'm interviewing you to see if you're somebody I want in my kids' lives, and that's a huge responsibility. So that kind of adds something to it. And I don't know. I mean, people throw around the term "playing the field" and all that, and I guess that's kind of a well-worn term now. By my standards, again, I come from the days of barn dancing and ice cream socials, that sort of thing. Oh wait, yeah, there were a few singles bars. I don't want you to think I've got straw hanging out of my teeth or anything,
buddy.
But, it's just a different world that we live in. It's terrifying. I've got a 24-year-old son that's just essentially he's just kind of given up. He's not going to do that. He's career driven, and so it's kind of you don't know what's out there, what's lurking, in the internet ether, if you will, what's floating about and what you're going to, and look, a lot of this is based upon it's based upon a questionnaire, that you kind of fill out, what are you looking for? And I wonder if there's a question on one of these sites where it says, you shall not date anybody else. You must be exclusive to me. I don't know. I think that would narrow the field down pretty quickly. What do you think?
I think you're exactly right. And it's interesting how some men think, I guess. I'm not an enlightened cat. Like, I just can't imagine enforcing something like that on somebody. I can't think of treating somebody so disrespectfully. It's like, if you're looking for one thing and they're looking for something else, that immediately tells you we're not matched up. Move on.
Right.
But that's not the case for some people. And I've known a number of men like this that are disgusting people. The compound area that we mentioned earlier, it's an area of Florida where it's 12 square miles of roads, of sewer lines that have been poured. There's power lines have been run because they were going to build infrastructure. They were building the infrastructure for housing and shops and things. 12 square miles is a big area.
Massive.
And that was this area called the compound. And so as police were able to they got Daniel Stearns as this guy who has dated our victim, Nancy. We don't know where she is. And we know she was dating him, and based on their communication that we have text info on, they were arguing because she would not just date him only. And they were able to determine that Mr. Stearns, was making a number of trips from his house into the compound in his truck. And they started following him. And Joe, it's almost like they didn't they didn't find out what happened until after they found out what he was doing in the compound. It's not like they found, they had an argument in this side of the house,
right.
And here's blood over here where he, did whatever. And this is where he rolled her up. And no, they didn't find her like that. They found her in multiple areas in the
boy.
compound, multiple areas where she had been buried.
Well,
Multiple areas tells you that she was dismembered, right?
Yeah. When you say multiple areas, right now, Dave, that picture you just created for me, I'm thinking mounds, individual little mounds.
Mm-hmm.
And if this makes a case like this, particularly, I think from a scene processing standpoint, it is a gold mine from a forensic standpoint. However, it makes it kind of daunting when you think about, one of the things we talk about many times is primary, secondary, and tertiary scenes, right?
Yep.
Well, if you were to stick with the letter of this, with that, you're
Right.
thinking, okay, where's the primary scene? I would go back to say that the primary scene, if you can figure it out, is going to be the location where she is actually killed. And also, again, you had mentioned that she was dismembered. Dismemberment is, in my estimation, is not going to take place in multiple locations. It's going to take place in a central location, and the body will essentially be kind of parsed up, I guess, and then delivered. I wonder if that's what's going on in this particular case. But I got to tell you, there's one more element to this case from a forensic standpoint that makes it all the more difficult to work. I'll give you a hint. It involves heat. I don't know if I've ever told you this before, Dave.
I love you too.
Back at you, big guy. I worked a series of killings in New Orleans many years ago, and it was a guy that was he had committed. It was a serial killer, and he had killed. It wasn't some huge, enormous number, and right now my memory fails me. I think it was maybe 5 or 6. This guy would kill prostitutes, and then every single time he would kill them, he would go back to that location and dump the body. Well, the sheriff's office got the idea that we need to get 2 guys and just assign them to that area and have them set up a hide. And Dave, you know what? This is back in the olden times, I guess, as my grandson would say. They actually caught this guy pulling a body out of a trunk.
Wow.
And he was dumping this dead prostitute that he had strangled with wire there in that spot, or approximating the same spot. And that was way, way before the days. I think our cell phones back then, you had to have a bag with a strap around your neck. So there wasn't a lot of tracking, that went on with cellular tracking back then. But now, it's opened up an entirely different world. Particularly, and I think it's very well demonstrated here in Nancy's homicide.
Well, it's interesting that the case where she doesn't pick up the children on the 18th, on February 18th, that's where the investigation begins. And so they were like, well, when was she last seen? And it wasn't on the 18th. That's when she didn't show up, pick up the kids. And as they tracked it back, they went back to February 15th. That was the last time she was seen. She actually met a friend, and they were at a gun club in Palm Bay. And she's with her friend at the gun club, and they're able to use digital information to determine that's where her cell phone was, just like the friend said. And her friend said, well, she was meeting the guy she's been dating, Stearns, later on. And so now that's the last person, the last time she was seen alive was at the gun club with her friend, telling her friend, I'm going to see this guy I've been dating, Stearns, Daniel Stearns. And so that's when police got his name. So you're talking day one, they already have the name, how they met online. They're pulling text messages. They're pulling stuff online of from the dating app. And very quickly, they start looking for Nancy Howery. Where's her car? She drove a Honda Odyssey minivan, And so day one of the search, the first 24 hours, they're looking for that car and her, and they find the Honda minivan, and it's abandoned. And Joe, you've done so many investigations over time. We often hear this term abandoned. If a car is parked somewhere and left, is that abandoned, or is that just a term that is used that the individual who normally drives this car is not driving it? It was parked over here and it's not in their driveway.
Yeah, I'd have to, one of the things that my mind would flee to relative to that comment about the abandonment of a vehicle. First off, obviously there's a huge delineation, and I think you and I both throughout our lives, we've been in positions where our car broke down, right?
Right.
Well, we didn't abandon our vehicle. It's just mechanically unsound. And did you know that in cases like this, there's a whole team of, did you know that many larger jurisdictions employ mechanics that will check out how functional a vehicle is.
Wow.
And they can pull other data off of this.
Sure.
These people are very bright. There's a lot of forensic data, that comes off of vehicles. And particularly nowadays, with the onboard computers, and they can be tracked and all these sorts of things. I'm looking now, where my mind is going here. I'm thinking about the case, Celeste, out in California with this, this Tesla. And I'm not saying that a Honda Odyssey rises to that level of technology, but what I am saying, there's information that you can pull off of a car. So is it in fact functional? And also, if it is functional and you take that car in, one of the things you're going to want to look for in here, is there any evidence, well, first off, of life there, and further, is there any evidence of the end of life there? We begin to think again about this idea of primary scenes. Well, if you've got a vehicle, was she actually killed in that vehicle at some point in time? You have to entertain that thought as an investigator, because the devil is in fact in the details. You want to be able to kind of suss this out and try to understand what kind of violence was committed in a vehicle. So they would go over this abandoned vehicle very, very carefully, particularly when they can come back and they tag it to a person that is, let's face it, a single mom of two, who you can set your clock by her relative to the handoff with her ex-husband, who they seem to have a pretty healthy relationship. And he's the first person that calls it in. One more thing I wanted to mention to you about this is that how many of these cases do we cover now over these years, where when you have some type of violent event involving a spouse, automatically our eyes go to that spouse or the ex-spouse, and you're thinking that's prime suspect, right? But this guy wasn't like this. He immediately alerted the police. He's on board with this. He's not like one of these people that kind of slinks off into the darkness and doesn't participate in the search. He clams up. He calls an attorney, all those sorts of things. You're talking about the missing mother of his children, and he has a full appreciation of that. We actually found out about that in court relative to him and comments that he made in this case, Dave.
He was... We'll get to that in a minute, because he really I just respect him for what he did with the investigation, the ex-husband. In this case, her car was, I was thinking about a case we did out of Atlanta, Joe, in the recent past, where a woman went missing. She was an eye doctor, I believe, and her husband had been out of town, and over the course of a weekend in Marietta, she had gone missing, and anyway, and she turned up. She wasn't hurt. She was alive, but they mentioned her car was abandoned. And in that case, her car was abandoned, but it was in a parking lot about a half mile from where her office was, but it was in a parking lot. And I thought, how weird to call that as abandoned. So whenever I hear that term, that's my first thought. What is abandoned? Well, in this case, her car was found abandoned on the side of a road, and it was found on the side of the road in Palm Bay. Now, I don't know how big Palm Bay is. I don't know how many roads there are, but that's where it was found. Okay, so her car is found in Palm Bay. The compound is in Palm Bay. So police immediately are looking at Daniel Stearns as a person of interest. They bring him in to talk to him, and whoa, he's all over the map. And by the way, when you try to lie to a cop,
right,
especially a detective, even a regular street cop, but mainly because they hear lies. They hear more lies than truth. But
yeah,
a detective, yeah, you're not gonna. They already have a lot of information before you sit down in front of them, and they're gonna bust you. And so they said from his first interview, he was interviewed twice during the course of the investigation, and he showed significant areas of deception and identified himself as the prime suspect in the case through their discussion with him during the investigation. That's how quickly they had him. They started surveilling him then. So, Joe, they're watching Daniel Stearns, and they see Daniel Stearns leaving his home in his pickup truck and driving into the compound, different areas, and it looks like he's burying things. What does that tell you?
If they have that kind of information, that's going to be significant in the idea. Can you imagine being a police officer and you begin to track somebody and they're carrying around items in his truck and probably the tools to facilitate this? And maybe you see him going out, discarding things, digging holes, packing the earth, all manner of things like this. Your suspicion has been raised almost immediately. You know that there are, in fact, problems ahead for this man. And the police probably know that they have a killer on their hands. You know, it's quite one thing to have remains, just found. And I got to tell you, one of the interesting things, Dave, is the fact that you've got multiple holes, if you will, that are dug in these locations or at, let me just say it again, the compound. And what they're recovering out of these, areas that have been dug out in the earth are burned human remains. You got a lot going on here because you've got dismemberment, you've got burning, and then you've got burying. There's a lot of action involved with all of this. But, the big question is, and you and I have talked about this extensively, if we can find out who a person is, everything else comes into focus, right? Because you begin to figure out who was in their orbit, who is the reality of their life that they're living at that moment in time. But there was a big piece to this that occurred, and I'm not being flippant when I use that term piece, because they found a finger. Now, what are the chances?
Bones and everything else, they find a finger.
They found a finger, and it's intact. And the beauty of this is that you can take a finger, and you can actually roll a print off of it. I've talked about in the past with, I know we've had this discussion about the degloving of hands in decomposition, and how I've actually used a glove over my hand and then put the degloved hand of a decedent over my hand and rolled a print off of that. This finger, though, appears to have been intact. Now, one of the things that we will do with individual digits of, like if fingers are cut, or let's just say all that is left is the pad, in other words, the tip of the finger. If it's kind of shriveled, because one of the things that happens with human remains like this, particularly fingertips, it always happens more distally. So the shoulder is proximal to the torso. The fingers are distal to the torso. So the furthest away part, did you know that those areas begin to desiccate first? So they dry out. So lots of times what we do in an attempt to kind of rebuild the tissue is that we can use a substance that funeral home directors use called tissue builder, and you literally inject it into the site, and the area begins to kind of swell.
Wow.
It swells, and then you can roll a print off of it. Here's an interesting little exercise. If anybody's interested in teaching your kids forensic science, just at a basic level, go out and purchase white party balloons. They have to be white. Okay.
All right.
Get an ink pad. Okay. If you've got a child and you want to teach them about fingerprints, ink their finger, roll their finger across the surface of an uninflated white balloon and blow the balloon up and see what happens. All of a sudden, their fingerprint comes to life and it just like swells and you can see all the little details in there.
Oh, wow.
I know, it's pretty amazing, but it's the same principle relative to taking a dismembered portion of the body, because we've got a lot of dismemberment that has gone on here. I'm just curious as to how that finger got separated from the hand. And this actually winds up putting a name with all of these pieces that are out there. Isn't that kind of amazing?
This entire story, it is really amazing how far science has come, forensic science, to be able to digitally, using digital forensic science here, they were able to track this guy back using the cell phone and online activity. And they're following him around. I think we got this 50 hours, of surveillance time on him. They've got him going into the compound, which is a huge area, but they've got him going and they know where he is. And they found him doing things that you have no reason to do. I mean, you don't have a reason to go out and bury a bucket of stuff in the middle of nowhere. It's just not something that normal people do.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong. When they discovered this guy, he's actually dumping a bucket into an adjacent canal, correct?
Well, it was right near the canal, yeah.
Yeah, so they've got eyes on him.
Yeah.
Can I throw something else at you real quick?
Really? You're going to smatter this up some more? Go for it.
Well, I think that this is quite salient here.
Yeah.
Just because you have this finger that has been, dismembered or cut away from the rest of the body, that's only a finger that you're identifying. And I'm going to introduce the lawyers on the stage here. Because, if you're going down a road where you're going to charge someone with a homicide, okay, I think that it's dictated to us that we have to make sure that every one of these individual holes contains the scientifically validated remains of the missing subject. Because, people could say, well, we've got random holes out here. How do we know they're all tied back? But that fingertip is the thing that begins to kind of point the way, isn't it? Because if you can, in fact, get that finger identified to a specific person, and then you go through and any kind of viable remain, even though it's burned, you can find something in there. Can you tie all of that together in one neat package where we can actually demonstrate in court? And you have to be prepared to do this. So, and they can make it very dramatic. Certainly the prosecutor can. Well, in hole 1, we've got this part of her body. In hole 2, this. And do you see how the drama builds with that if you're taking that to court? And the science is kind of paving the way for all of this, because now it's even more powerful, I think, in my opinion, than just saying, well, we found a suitcase full of dismembered remains. No. That's not what you're talking about here. Not only do we have dismembered remains, each individual part has been subjected to severe heat in an attempt to render the body down. Oh, and by the by, this guy went to the lengths of digging a hole for each element over and over again. And again, it goes to kind of the darkness, that surrounds all of this.
All right, so
it would. Yeah,
go ahead. Finger, Joe. Okay, you've got a finger, but we do have the other body parts. And as you mentioned, in court, it's not enough to say, well, it has to be X. It doesn't work like that. You actually have to prove it, because you've always got some guy that probably was the class clown who comes up and says, okay, you have the finger, but you know what? She could have owed the mob and they chopped it off to get her to come up with the money, and that doesn't mean he killed her. We don't know. You got to prove it. So how are you going to do that with the rest of the bones? You got the finger. Okay, we know this is her finger. I'm not being light on this at all. It's just that's how I'm going to be honest, Joe. Having done crime-related reporting for a long time now, some defense attorneys have no shame and say things with a straight face. And actually you think, well, he's an educated guy or woman. Surely they wouldn't just make this up out of nowhere, but they do all the time. So, all right, you got the finger identified. You're on the right track. But what about the bones? You've got a body that he tried to render down, as you said. I got a feeling that's going to be really extra heinous for a jury to hear.
Yeah, there's two ways that we go about this, Dave. I think that, again, back to a comment that I'd made earlier, I think that you have to find viable. It can't just be the tissue.
Right.
It has to be viable tissue that you can actually do DNA testing on to say, okay, this bit belongs to this person. And just imagine, if you will, like the person, is the central pivot point in all of this. And you've got kind of these almost like a Venn diagram, these bubbles extending out from that person. Each one of those little bubbles, what you want to do is scientifically validate the existence of that person at the center point with these individual bubbles of data, where it goes back to them and you can actually say. And so you have to scientifically verify that. The other part to this that is really key here and goes to another level is anthropology. Because if all else fails and you're trying to get an ID, what an anthropologist can bring to the table here, and there are some very fine ones in Florida, by the way. They've got several forensic anthropology programs in the state of Florida. I don't know if people are aware of that, but I digress. You can still do facial reconstructions, and the morphology of the bones, you can look at the morphology and say, okay, this is a white female. This individual is within this age range. And you might even be able to determine if this individual is suffering from any kind of disease in life. With women, you get things like osteoporosis that's evidenced on the bone. If they have arthritis, all those sorts of things that you look for that are the nature of a life having been led. But here's the key. In this particular case, they did involve a forensic anthropologist. And guess what they found? You've got a particulated skull. And let me just put that in more layman's terms.
Thank you.
You've got a skull that is grossly fragmented. Well, why is it grossly fragmented? Well, it's fragmented because it's been slammed by a lead core projectile. In other words, you've got someone that has been executed, Dave.
Oh, wow.
This, from what we're understanding at this point, the victim, was actually executed with a GSW to the back of the head. And Dave, the forensic anthropologist, was actually able to go back and say that there's an exit wound through the forehead. Now, a lot of folks will ask, well, Morgan, how in the world do they determine a hole is a hole, right? No, it ain't. It's not. And the way they determine if something is, in fact, an entrance versus an exit, if you will think about a BB being shot through a glass pane, okay, if you walk up to that defect in the glass, you'll notice that one side is smooth, okay? You've got a hole in it. You look at the other side, and that side will be beveled. It'll have kind of if you think about like beveling, like rounded edges, like you see on footboards and things like that, not crown molding. What am I trying to say? That runs along floor molding. That's a beveled
shoe
edge.
mold.
So it's shoe mold. There you go. Shoe mold. It's rounded. Well, Dave, did you know that whatever side of the defect you've got that mold, that rounding on the beveling, that's where it went through. That's where it exited.
Wow.
Because it blows out. It literally blows out, and it leaves that kind of interesting ridge there behind. So when this individual, the anthropologist, is trying to put this skull back together, suddenly this thing just like pops to life. Can you imagine being there and you actually see this in your lab and you're trying to figure this out? How in the world did the skull get this fragmented? You hope you have all the pieces, because sometimes they don't.
Right.
You begin to put this thing together, and all of a sudden you breathe life into this skull, if you will. You begin to understand the dynamics. The other thing that an anthropologist can actually do, Dave, sometimes they can determine range of fire, because did you know that even on the surface of bone, we always talk about gunfire as it applies to like clothing and skin. Did you know that if you have a press or close to press contact gunshot wound, like on the back of the head, that injection, it's not just a projectile, it's actually that hot air that's being injected into that space. Did you know the scalp kind of pulls away from the bone for a second like this? And if there is unburned gunpowder and smoke and soot, it'll actually deposit on the external table of the skull. So you can go in there and you can actually see kind of this darkened area there. If you do a scraping on that and you look at it with a scanning electron microscope, you'll be able to chemically identify that is probably propellant or a product of propellant, otherwise gunpowder. And then you're going to see this blown out, and you can determine trajectory too. Like what was the physical relationship between the victim and the perpetrator? Were they standing above when they did this? And this goes from backwards, because we know that it's going from back to front. Okay, so back to front, from below to above. You think about a classic GSW gunshot wound to the head. And classic, I mean, in the sense of a classic execution where somebody is kneeling before an individual with their back turned to them and they're popped in the back of the head. Well, that trajectory is from above to below. The trick is to try to understand, can you get it where you can determine directionality from the perspective of, does it go from the left to the right or from the right to the left? Wow. That's a bit more difficult to determine when you have a fragmented skull, though.
Unbelievable. So that's how they were able to present this case.
Yeah.
Where we have a woman, an accomplished woman, divorced, custody arrangement with the ex, good relationship there. And at 44, she goes out and starts dating, does not want to become exclusive to this one guy, and he can't handle that. Yeah. So he takes and kills her by a shot to the back of the head, and they're able to show how he did it. They get the fingerprint from her middle finger and 5 buckets of her that he has disgustingly tried to do away with in an area called the Compound in South Florida.
Yeah, and that's the tale that is told here, and it's terrifying, particularly in the world that we live in today, where it's not like you walk into a bar, or you go to a church social, or you're at school, or a friend introduces you. You're talking about a phantom that seemingly only exists in the digital world. And then suddenly, life is breathed into them when you meet them. And you realize you've come face to face with a sadistic demon. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.